Aaron Lutzi, episode number 14, Second Nature. You're on the road right now. Where are you, buddy?
I am in Bentonville, Arkansas, the self-proclaimed mountain bike capital of the USA.
We got to do an entire episode about Bentonville. There's an amazing story to tell. It is the mountain bike capital of the USA. It's the American home base of the amazing brand Rafa and Allied, two leading cycling brands. And they've done so much to invest in that outdoor recreation economy. And I wonder what the downstream implications are. Do people feel happier in Bentonville because their local government and their local business leaders have invested so much in physical health and outdoor recreation
It
opportunities?
is it is pretty cool to see people out and about. Like you see a lot of people riding bikes in Bentonville, Arkansas, as they should. There's a lot of people who have actually moved here. Later today, we're actually going to meet up with somebody who is from the Netherlands. She's like a multi-time world champion, and we're going to meet up with her. She just moved to Bentonville not too long ago to do mountain bike coaching, and the riding here seems pretty good, and people seem really pro bike here. So why not? Of all the places you could go, move to a town that is investing in the outdoors. That sounds like a pretty good place to be.
We'll talk about why you're on the road here in a sec. But first, we got to talk about our new viral sensation, that being the Second Nature LinkedIn profile, bro. Talk about it. How did this come into
Wow.
existence? Give some love to our boy, Matt Sharkey, and tell people how they can follow along.
Yes, absolutely. That was a very exciting 24 hours around the launch. I think we blew past or got real close to 1,000 people, and now I think we're past 100, 1,500
We're
people
past
already on the
1,600
LinkedIn.
as of this morning.
1,600.
Yeah.
Man, I can't hit refresh fast enough. It's so cool. And you were reading off the list of the people that were actually signing up to follow Second Nature on LinkedIn, and I was tripping. There were some hitters in that list. Yeah, we have been wanting to do something because this podcast is really kind of B2B already. It is kind of the behind the scenes, the business, the outdoor. And so LinkedIn is actually a pretty great place for us to share not only episodes that we're putting out, but the most recent news and updates and jobs that are opening up and ways to get into the outdoor industry. And what better place to share that than actually LinkedIn? It's probably better than Instagram or anything else we could do. So if you're not following us on LinkedIn, now might be a good time.
Give a shout out to Matt Sharkey real quick because he's gonna
Yes,
he's gonna help
absolutely.
us curate some valuable information on that page, and we want people to follow along.
Yes, Matt Sharkey, our friend, has been doing something on his LinkedIn page for a while where he kind of rounds up all the jobs that are in the outdoor industry from executive to manager, director, you name it. And he's been putting them out week after week. And he came to us and was like, hey guys, I've been doing this, but it doesn't really make sense for me to keep posting it, but I'd love to contribute to Second Nature. What you guys are doing is so cool. And he'd shouted us out on LinkedIn a couple weeks prior, which really, that was amazing to me. That blew me away. And for him to come to us and be like, I'd love to help you guys continue to grow this thing, and I want to put this on Second Nature. I feel like it's a better fit there anyway. That was kind of the last piece of the puzzle that we really needed, I think, to make the whole LinkedIn thing happen. So huge thank you to Matt for helping us out and for his continued support.
Shout out Matt Sharkey. He was actually the global director of sports marketing at the North Face when I was a North Face athlete, and before they moved their corporate headquarters from the Bay Area here. He lives up in Petaluma, not far from me, but before VF moved their corporate headquarters back to Denver. Actually, the North Face has a brand new president, a new brand president who is just, you know, instituted here in the last couple of weeks. Maybe that's something we can talk about on a future episode. But go to the Second Nature LinkedIn profile. We'll make sure to put a link in the show notes of today's episode. Make sure you follow along. We're going to be curating some cool job postings there. And over time, I think we'll do a lot of, sort of native content on our LinkedIn platform, which I think will be a great opportunity to connect with other people in the outdoor industry, make those relationships, and generally learn a little bit more about this amazing category and industry that we all work within. Lutzi, you and I, we're going to talk at the front here about some big projects that we have going on in the spirit of the show, which is building brands, businesses, and careers in the outdoor industry. This is the Business of Outdoor podcast. We both have our own businesses in the space, and we are both launching into critical moments of the year. So maybe starting with you, we'll go back to the fact that you're in Arkansas right now. Tell the people what you have going on and why it's significant to Super Rider.
Yeah, you and I have both got some huge weeks with not a lot of sleep happening in the last little bit to prep for it. So I'm in Arkansas right now. I started in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm going to end in Portland, Oregon. I'm on a 2-week road trip right now, a big filming mission. I'm taking my oldest son and teaching him how to mountain bike for a 12 episode series on the Super Rider channel. And it's been really interesting. We've obviously mapped out the route. We've connected with all the riders that we're going to meet and all the locations we're going to go to along the way. But we've also worked with some partners to make this whole thing happen, which has been a really cool experience of trying to come up with the right way to sort of activate those partners without just being like, this thing is sponsored by this. And that's been the funnest thing for me. So, for example, one of the partners, Jensen USA, that I'm working with, every single time we stop in a new place, there's a box waiting for Tegan to unbox. And inside that box is something to kind of upgrade his bike, upgrade his style, upgrade his equipment. And so it's just like a cool way for us to, give a nod to this online bike shop that can ship you parts literally anywhere, but also like fun to watch him kind of upgrade all of his stuff. And as his skill increases, so does his look, his style, his bike, all the other things that come with it. So the marketing nerd in me is loving just not only having partners to work with, but being creative about how we integrate everybody into the overall story. And the first couple days of teaching my oldest an outdoor sport like mountain biking were well, they were interesting. They were a little frustrating. I had some second guesses for sure of, did I put him in over his head? Was this the right call? Oh no, we have 2 weeks of this. But then things started clicking, and now it's we're picking up some steam, which is pretty exciting. But some of these outdoor sports, like, they're not easy. You can't just go out and do them right away. Running may be a little bit easier to pick up than mountain biking, but still, like, you can't just show up and blow up. So I've had to exercise a lot of patience so far on this trip, but we're doing good.
Okay, so
Tell me about.
no,
Oh,
no,
go ahead.
no. So that's the what of what you're doing, but what's the why? Like, what impact do you want this to have on Super Rider? And is it one of the biggest creative projects that you've undertaken for your channel? Because to me, it feels like
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge undertaking for so many different reasons. But the biggest reason why I'm doing this, I think, other than the father-son bonding, which is also important,
So
is
good. Happy Father's Day,
the
by the way, bro.
likewise,
Yes.
man. Uh, I think the biggest thing for me is that when we talk about content strategy for a channel like Super Rider on YouTube, or really any media channel, there's this pyramid, right? You have help content, hub content, and hero content. And your base of the pyramid is always help content. It's evergreen. People can find your content by just Googling it, or, YouTube is the #2 search engine in the world. So the best way for people to find you in the beginning is making stuff that's the most useful, that would answer a question on a Google search. And so my channel has almost entirely been help content up to this point,
Mm.
which is great. But it's also sort of a transactional relationship. I want to learn how to wheelie. This guy's going to teach me how to wheelie, the end. And where does it go from there? Maybe people stick around to be like, what else can this guy teach me? But do they really care about me? Do they care about Super Rider? Does it really matter? And hub content is sort of that next level up. It's a lot more storytelling. It's a lot more engagement with the community. It builds like a stronger relationship with the people that are viewing your stuff. It's a little bit more lifestyle. It's a little bit more story. It's a little bit more meat to really dig into.
Mm-hmm.
And then hero content, like I mentioned, is just like the hammers, the banger content. And we'll get there at some point. I've got an idea for what that looks like. But I really need to start developing the hub content if I'm going to have this pyramid. I don't think that I can develop as strong of a community solely on help content. And after 4 years of doing that, I really have this desire to grow and to develop the audience and to make Super Rider into something more than just a tutorial channel. And so this is really the first big pivot of my content strategy.
Brilliant. Can we talk about the transparent economic part of this? Because obviously you have recently just left your job. You talked about how you're integrating partners into this. Obviously, it's not all about, making cash, but ultimately we do have to make ends meet. There is inherent value in the father-son bonding, but you're building a business now. You've left your job. You're all in. What does this look like economically for you? Are you able to cover your cost and some?
Yeah, yeah, it should cover everything. Again, like the father son side of it, even if I had to come out of pocket a little bit, this one would kind of be worth it, but it would be really nice if it didn't.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the case. So we've got a couple different partners who are helping with not only the cost of the trip, but also paying like an integration fee for each one of the 12 episodes. So I mentioned Jensen USA is one of them. They're helping out with every single episode. There's another partner called Loan Pass, which this is actually something we should dig into
Yep.
and maybe even have them on the podcast.
You've mentioned it a
But
couple of times, but keep going. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they have relationships with all these mountains and shuttle services across the country. So a lot of the locations that we're stopping to ride. In fact, yesterday we rode Howler Bike Park in Branson, Missouri, which was incredible. You have this pass and you get access to all these different places. And so a lot of the stops along the way of this trip are based on Loan Pass spots. And then Marin, the bike company that I work with, is also taking care of us and helping us out with a little contribution as well. So we're ahead right now. And then on top of all of this, we'll make a little bit or break even at the very least with this trip. But then every single episode will earn YouTube AdSense.
Yep.
So depending on how they do, we'll also come out ahead. So we should be in great shape overall. And the best part about making content and putting it on a place like YouTube is that even after the first week of the video coming out, I'm not going to delete that. I'm not going to unlist it. That's going to continue earning. It's going to continue growing. It's going to continue being a valuable part of my catalog forever, basically.
Yeah.
And so these are also sort of like long-term investments into the growth of everything. I think too, aside from all that stuff, this is also sort of investment in my abilities as a content creator, really getting lots and lots of practice at actually creating more story-driven content. It's been a little bit since I've been in this side of the content game, and I'm really anxious to do more storytelling and to develop that muscle a little bit more. So that's more of my why. Like I'm happy that I'm coming out ahead financially on this thing, but really I think that getting better at telling story, getting better at introducing my audience to this stuff is actually going to set me up for way more success down the line. Because if I can demonstrate this one road trip and this one story, if I can do it the right way, that opens so many avenues for me to grow financially as a business, as a storyteller, as a channel in the future.
When does episode 1 drop?
It's probably going to be a couple weeks. After
the trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Like 10 days more of filming, and then I'm going to take a deep breath afterwards, and then I'm just going to go into a big editing session. Now, I usually call it the reign of terror, and the reign of terror is when you lock the door to your editing room and you can't come out until the work is done. I don't know how long the reign of terror is going to last on this one, but filming nonstop for 2 weeks, it's going to be a lot of footage.
It's going to be a lot of material. Well, maybe our boy Ryan Thrower can help you with the reign of terror. He frequently goes into the edit cave and locks the door behind him. He just finished a cool project with Osprey that we're going to release next week, and now he can take a deep breath because he's doing Western States.
Oh man, I'm so happy.
Yeah,
That was incredible to watch. Maybe
Yeah.
that should be a BPC, but the Weight Watchers thing that he and
Yeah.
Tim did, that's incredible.
All right, cool. All right, well, let me tell you a little bit about what I've got going on. So this coming week, 10 days for me, also some of the biggest of my entire professional career. At least that's how I feel about it. I'm not going to lie. Getting a little bit nervous about it. I have to be sort of teed up, charismatic, in front of cameras, on stage, and broadcasting for basically the next 7-8 days straight. So what that's going to look like is today, we're recording on Thursday, June 20th. I'm heading up to Olympic Valley, California, the Lake Tahoe area. Starting tomorrow is the Broken Arrow Sky Race, one of the premier shorter distance race festivals in North America. There's a vertical K race tomorrow, a 46K on Saturday, and then a 23K on Sunday. Me and the team from Free Trail, we're putting together daily live stream shows to recap all the action from Broken Arrow. The idea is that we bring the college game day model to the great sport of trail running, a little bit of breakfast from Wimbledon, keeping the fans stoked, entertained, and informed throughout Broken Arrow race weekend. And then starting Monday, so that's the next 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, starting Monday, in partnership with Hoka, we launch into trailgating Western States, North America's premier 100-mile foot race, one of the most important races in the world, the oldest 100-mile race in the world, the granddaddy of them all, the Masters, the Wimbledon of trail running. And your boy has the opportunity to realize a childhood dream to really help spread the message, the gospel of trail running to a global audience. And our trailgating shows are some of the biggest opportunities for free trail in our existence, and something that I am taking very seriously and view as an amazing honor but also huge responsibility. So the way it's going to look is, again, we're doing our daily show. It'll look sort of similar to what we're doing with Broken Arrow, but a lot of guests coming in and out, a sort of a theme for each show, awesome co-hosts. But Hoka is building us a sweet set that we're calling the Free Trail Saloon in the coolest coffee shop in Olympic Valley. So my hope is we're going to have a live audience for each and every one of those shows. That's going to be Monday through Thursday next week. In the middle of that, next Wednesday is TrailCon. Dude, we have 314 people registered for TrailCon right now.
Wow.
And I'm moderating 3 out of the 4 panels. So in addition to choreographing 7 straight days of broadcasting, I also have to, do a bunch of public speaking, which is okay. Something I'm getting very comfortable with. And then once our trailgating stuff and TrailCon is behind me, I still do have responsibilities for the board of the Western States 100, which is something I'm proud to serve on. And then next Saturday, a week from this coming Saturday, is the Western States 100, when I, along with Corinne Malcolm, my broadcast partner, co-host the first 20 hours of North America's most important foot race. So,
dude, be careful what you're good at.
Yeah.
Be careful what you're good at.
So I don't know. Part of me is worried that maybe we've bitten off more than we can chew, but I view this as an amazing opportunity for free trail, an opportunity for us to have a really broad impact, and also commercially it's like really important for us. So there's a lot about it that holds massive significance. And again, we're leaving today. I'm feeling prepped, ready. Here we go, launching into it.
That's a huge undertaking. I mean, I saw what you did at UTMB last year, and that seemed to be sort of the kind of round one of this, kind of your prototype for what this looks like, to show up at a huge race and to just own media the entire time. And I've got to imagine it worked out pretty well last time, and I'm assuming it will absolutely smash this time.
Hopefully, bro. Wish me luck, because I'm going to be on camera a lot. I'm going to be talking ad nauseum. I hope people don't get sick of me. And then, being on stage, hosting this important B2B conference, the first of its kind for trail running. I don't know. That more than anything, I'm nervous about. I feel like I really want to nail my panels. There's going to be 300 plus people in the room. So yeah, anyway, it's a great honor, great responsibility, but certainly something that, is starting to make me a little nervous, transparently.
I think it's going to be incredible. And just the fact that you're doing TrailCon, Taste of TrailCon this year, to like get the ball rolling with this concept and get people excited about it. And I can only imagine the momentum, you're going to have for next year. And I will absolutely be there next year. I'll take on panel hosting duties for you. I owe you one after this year.
You're going to be delivering a TED talk next year, Lutz.
I'll do whatever it takes. But I love the idea, and you've been talking about it for a long time. What are the panels that you're going to be hosting?
Okay, so the first one is an events panel where I have some of the great race directors in the sport who will be in dialogue about the state of trail running events globally. The second is trail running media. So we're going to talk a lot about the media landscape. And then the third is the intersection of brands and athletes. That's the panel that I wanted you to be on. Even without you, though, we've got incredible speakers on that panel too. The fourth and final panel, which I am not moderating, is sort of the intersection of brands and retailers. So we're trying to cover as much as we can in year one. There's certain segments of the trail running economy that we are leaving out that we're hoping to include next year. But again, this is our soft launch for TrailCon 2025, which will be more of the official launch. But even as a soft launch, 300 people plus are going to be there, and it feels like there's momentum behind it. So it's very exciting, but I do feel like a lot of the responsibility is on my shoulders to make it good. So wish me luck, bro.
Good luck. You're going to smash it. And, the thing is, it's great that you're doing a soft launch, that you're doing a version of it to sort of work out the kinks and build this thing, knowing that next year it's going to be even bigger and better, and you'll take those key learnings through. There's a sign in one of my friends' offices or studios or whatever you want to call it, and it says, anything that's worth doing is worth doing slow. And I don't necessarily know if you're going slow on any of this stuff, but at least you're not just trying to do the whole trail con at the maximum level. Like, I think it's smart that you're soft launching it. You're doing it. It's still going to be big, 300 plus people at a conference with panels like that. And that's all in one day. I mean, that's a lot to take on and a lot to execute, in addition to, back-to-back races as well. I mean, wow.
Dude,
but the fact that you're getting it started is incredible.
I'm pumped. And I suck at going slow. And my BPC is in some ways relevant to that philosophy. And again, we were talked about that last week about Tim Tollefson and some of my takeaways from your episode with him. And he's been very good at going slow and building in a slow and methodical way. I have not been good at that, much to the detriment of my own personal and mental health. So anyway,
I mean,
I'm pumped.
You are a racer, right? Like, yeah. It's in your blood to go fast.
Go big or go home. But yeah, sometimes you got to take your foot off the gas. Anyway, good to catch up. Hopefully that's valuable for our listeners. Aaron and I are both launching into very important, big things for our respective businesses. And I think it's fun to be transparent about that and all the implications that are downstream of those projects. We have some really fun stuff to talk about here today. The theme of today's show really is athletes who transcend their sports. There's been some fun articles that have come out, some cool pieces of news that Aaron and I have been texting back and forth about that are relevant to 3 different sports but have a very common theme. Star athletes who've made an incredible impact on their sport and their community, now building a deeper, longer lasting legacy for themselves, starting with Shaun White. Aaron, the Snow League was announced. The article that you forwarded to me was from Forbes, Forbes.com. We'll make sure to include a link in the show notes. If it's all right with you, I'll just read the first couple paragraphs to set things up and then hand it over. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. And in the newsletter this week, I'm also going to include a link to the Snowboarding Mag interview that they did with Sean T-Bird, who is involved with the Natural Selection Tour, did an interview with him that's actually really insightful as well. So we'll bombard everybody with as much links and content as we possibly can.
Hell yeah. First and foremost, the Snow League, great brand. So anyway, excellent. I'm going to read the first couple paragraphs here from Forbes and hand it over to Lutzi to contextualize a little bit. So it starts by saying, by all accounts, Shaun White has already cemented his snowboarding legacy. He's a 3-time Olympic gold medalist, the most of any snowboarder. He's won 13 X Games gold medalists and another 2 in skateboarding. He owns a namesake snowboard brand, White Space. There's not much more a pro snowboarder could hope to accomplish, but since his retirement from the sport, White has found himself thinking about building a legacy outside his personal accomplishments, one that could leave the sport better than it was when he competed in it. On Monday, White announced the launch of the Snow League, the first professional winter sports league for snowboarding and free skiing competition that he hopes will provide winter sport athletes their most straightforward opportunity to support themselves competing, as well as a path to being crowned a world champion. Debuting in winter 2025, the 5-event season, the Snow League will feature a global competition format. The league's first event in March 2025 will be held in the US, with the remaining 4 held at winter resort destinations around the world. And it will conclude after the 2026 Milano Cortina Olympic Games. That's the high level stuff. Lutzi, get us started on your thoughts and what it means for snow sports in general.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but there's also a $1.5 million prize purse
I
that's
didn't
attached to
mention
this thing.
that.
Also important and relevant, of course. We actually talked about this when we were talking to Tim a couple weeks back about this idea of athlete-run events. Rebecca Rush mentioned the same thing. If you want to go to a great event, have an incredible experience, go to an event that's run by an athlete. Their credibility is on the line, but more importantly, they're connected with other competitors. They have been around the world and experienced good and bad events, and they bring it all together. And what I think is really important about the Snow League is that Shaun White is coming at an event series from an angle of, I want to do something for snowboarding. I don't think this is necessarily a cash grab or anything that's business related as much as it is a passion project. Surely there's a financial incentive for it, but truly, I think he sees the opportunity, and reading some of the interviews that he did, he's thought really hard about how best to set up snowboarding for the future. There are a lot of other snowboarding event series that are sort of winding down into smaller and smaller. Dew Tour was 5 events and it was 4. Now maybe it's going to be 1. Not really sure. US Open, same thing, was 4 or 5 events. Now it's 1 or 2. Everything is kind of getting smaller and smaller, and he's breathing some additional life back into the sport by bringing a series like this to the table. And so I think for the most part, the intention there is really around snowboarding and how to continue growing the sport, how to continue making it accessible, and even listening to the format of the event where it's not, one run, one run, one run. It's a head-to-head format. So it's easy for people to follow a storyline, to judge for themselves, well, who had the sicker run, as opposed to having to look at 10 or 20 people snowboard at a time and figure out which one was the best. He's really thought about the format itself. He's thought about how to invite people to it. He's really taken all of those elements and tried to put together something that's really meaningful. And to go on further with this, something that was also incredibly successful in action sports was street league skateboarding. That was Rob Dyrdek's approach to reimagining skateboard competition, bringing the top athletes together, doing something that was commercially viable, but also credible within the sport. And this is sort of an analog to what Rob Dyrdek did with street league skateboarding.
Dyrdek was so ahead of his time, isn't it? Because I feel like there's a theme in sports right now where athletes are sort of transcending their success as professional athletes and turning it into a platform to launch their sport into the next generation. This being a great example of that. But Rob Dyrdek did that more in the early 2000s, right? Was that when Street League became a phenomenon?
I don't have the exact date on it, but the whole thing about street league skateboarding was so built around the athletes themselves, how best to treat the athletes, how best to put them in the right position to grow their own base and continue developing not just the athletes but the sport itself. It was really this new way to take it out of the X Games format, or to take it out of the existing formats that were there and were working, but just just one year after another, here's a new way to approach it, a new way to put the athletes in the spotlight and give them a new opportunity and do it the right way. And it was incredibly successful, and I believe still to this day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we're going to talk a little bit about skating here in a second for the first time in Second Nature history. Staying on Shaun White, if you were part of this group, what would you think would be the most important initiatives to make it have a broad mainstream impact? Because if you read the article, it feels like that's their goal. They say things about attracting a general interest sports fan, not, basically expanding out of the endemic snow sports and action sport fan community and touching people who have never been exposed to that style of competition. You being the content wizard, the media machine, what would you do from a marketing, content, storytelling angle to help this have a broad cultural and commercial impact?
When it comes to content, you either have to be first, best, or different. And I think that actually the elements that they're mixing together are a fair mix of all of it, right? They're really focused on getting the best athletes in the world. So there's the storyline of like we're bringing the best of the best together to compete at the highest level. We're also going to be different because we're mixing up the format to something that actually makes more sense than some of the other formats that existed. Shaun was saying in one of the interviews that, when he was competing in the Olympics, there would be an hour and a half wait between runs. And if you want to stay warm and do your best stuff, maybe sitting in ice cold conditions for an hour and a half between, dropping in on the half pipe isn't the best thing ever. And so he was thinking about, setting it up in a different format where you wouldn't have to do that. I think that having the best athletes, having the head-to-head format, and traveling around the world gives you so many storylines, and the people who are the members of the storylines are the best in the world. So there's so many different hooks when it comes to the content storytelling. You've got top athletes, you've got rivalries, you've got world travel, and you've got snowboarding, which has, of course, like Shaun has done the best job out of anybody in snowboarding aside from maybe Travis Rice in terms of translating snowboarding to a general population. And I think all those elements, you can't overlook the fact that Shaun White is involved with the series. He's going to be a big storyline with the series. And I think there's a lot to work with there too of, could they tell the story of this prodigy snowboarder who's running a business, who is launching this series? There's so much to work with from a content standpoint and a lot of initiatives that they could kind of chase down in that way.
Okay, so I want to get your reaction to this. The chief operating officer for the Snow League is a guy named Ian Warda, who it sounds like had worked with Shaun White during his athletic career. And one of the things that he says here in the article is, I'm just going to read this quote again. One of the principles in building this is to make it more appealing to a new fan and what we would call a casual sports fan. One of the reference point in this phenomenon of human interest storytelling in sports is behind the scenes and under the hood, behind the goggles, sort of developing the characters of our sport. People develop a personal connection to the athletes, how they're living their lives, their struggles, and their triumphs. Comments on that, Lutzi? Because this, I think, is part of a broader trend in sports media on Netflix and otherwise.
Yeah, everybody's trying to do Drive to Survive, right? And that's sort of exactly what that is. There is a track and field version of this as well. Netflix kind of figured out the how to translate this into other sports.
Yeah.
I've got to imagine that the other thing that they're working on now that they've launched it and now that Snow League is out into the world, probably their number one initiative is what that media output looks like. What's the broadcast deal? I mean, you look at mainstream sports and the number one driver of salaries and everything like that comes from the multi-billion-dollar deals with the news network or the networks.
Yep.
And I've got to imagine that now that Snow League exists and they have the clout of Shaun White and some of the other, the partners that are involved with the series who have invested in it also own major sports teams or are, involved in other mainstream sports. I've got to imagine that broadcast deal is number one on the list of things that they're trying to hunt down and lock in, because you could do a lot of this stuff through your own channels, but I think that the real money is probably going to come from a major broadcast partner.
Yeah, that's going to be critical for them, and I think not easy. I want to talk about the analog with the Premier Lacrosse League here in a second, because I think there is significant overlap, and this is something that you and I were talking about before we pressed record. But going back to what you said about this maybe being more of a passion project for Shaun, I would beg to differ. I think this is definitely a for-profit endeavor leveraging Shaun White's reputation, but it also, as is stated here in the article, backed by significant investors. People like Will Ventures, RA's Management Fund, David Blitzer, and Ryan Sports Ventures. So those individuals are certainly not doing this for a philanthropic end. There's $1.5 million of prize money. They are paying the athletes, and it sounds like paying them well. There will be significant production costs going into this. I think this is going to be a tough thing to close the loop on and make profitable. Of course, taking a long-term view and believing in the power of storytelling, and especially in outdoor and action sports. I do think that it's going to be hard to get a broadcast distribution deal with a mainstream TV or online distribution company. And they are going to have a lot of overhead expenses, which means they're going to be looking for a lot of brand partnership opportunities. But anyway, I just think it's important to talk about, the actual X's and O's of making this pencil out, because as we know, that's never a simple endeavor. There's going to be, I think, a lot of things that come up that are unexpected for the Snow League. It seems like they've got the best possible team at the helm to actually make this successful. But point being, I think they want to make this into a big, very valuable sport enterprise. And this is not just Shaun White's passion project. Comments from you?
Sure. Nope, 100% agree. I agree with you. Yeah. All I'm saying is that it's not some suit trying to figure out how to get snowboarding to be cool. Like when you listen to him talk about, what thought is going into the event, it's very clear that he has a desire to make sure that snowboarding continues to grow and continues to be valuable. And yeah, that absolutely benefits him in like 50 ways. He is part owner in a camp. He's got a snowboard brand. He's got all kinds of different parts of his legacy that rely on the growth of snowboarding to continue existing. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But I also think that there was probably a really basic starting point of what if we did Street League for snow?
Yeah.
And that's probably how the whole thing kicked off. And I've got to give credit to Rob Dyrdek for being the first person to really be like, all right, let's take our own model of action sports and try to make this thing work. And there have been many different attempts at different contest formats, some good, some bad, some underfunded, some overfunded. But Rob really took the real risk to put this out there, and he made it successful. And so even if they were to follow that, and I wonder how many, are they poaching people from Street League skateboarding to come over to the Snow League?
As operators, you mean, not athletes?
I would.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd be pulling as many of those operators who have helped build Street Leagues into what it is today. How many of them want to start a new project and see if they can do it again? I've got to wonder if some people are going to jump over there and help them out, or if there's any sort of collaboration even happening in the background.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Awesome. So I want to tell you about the overlap that I see here with the Premier Lacrosse League and Paul Rabel and get your reaction to it. And I think we can both agree that the only way the Snow League is viable is because of Shaun White and his platform credibility and influence with the consuming audience. Paul Rabel is similar in the game of lacrosse. He was sort of the LeBron James of the sport in his era, became frustrated with the former existing professional league that was called Major League Lacrosse, aka the MLL. He and an investment group attempted to purchase the MLL from the owners. They were rebuffed. So Paul, being the savage that he is, said, all right, I'm going to start my own league. And what he realized, the core vulnerability of the existing league was the fact that all of Paul's colleagues, himself included, were on 1-year contracts. All the professional athletes in the league were on 1-year contracts. So what he realized is, if I am able to start this league, I can take all the talent immediately. And what he did was effectively put that league out of business overnight. There was a little bit of continued existence from the MLL. There was eventually I think, charitably called merger, but it was really like the PLL put them out of their misery, the Premier Lacrosse League, Paul's league. And I thought it was such a brilliant and genius move from Paul when he was rebuffed in making an investment or purchasing acquisition of the MLL to take it into a new direction and realize the full potential of the beautiful game of lacrosse. And this is maybe Shaun White's analog. Is he frustrated with things like the Do Tour or the X Games? Does he feel like there's an obvious other model that should exist that will be more compelling to a viewing audience and therefore more commercially viable in the sports marketplace to elevate snowboarding and snow sports in general and provide a platform for professional athletes to make a living and allow brands to also become more commercially successful with a new consuming audience? So I think there's a lot here that's similar. Is Shaun White basically saying to all his friends and colleagues, his fellow professional snowboarders, even though he's past competition, hey, I have a better idea here. Let's position ourselves sort of in contrast to the existing competition structures that exist, and, in some way, basically take their market share or destabilize them as competitors in the events marketplace.
He was pretty clear in his interview that he wasn't trying to compete with X Games, that they were working around schedules for a lot of the other competitive events so that the athletes didn't get put in that position, which, again, from an athlete perspective, he understands exactly what that's like. I think that if you're starting something new like this, you can be a lot more nimble. You can listen to the athletes. You can develop this thing the way that it needs to go. If you look at the actual schedule, they're basically doing one event and then they're going to take a little break and then have 4 events. So they're going to build this thing up slowly. They're going to build it up correctly. And I think if you were to essentially buy another snow property and try to just make it a little bit better, there's so much stuff that's built into that kind of legacy stuff that you have to weed through. It's maybe better just to start from scratch. He's got a different format. He's got a different idea, and it probably makes sense just to start fresh. Will it have an impact on other events? Yes, but I think a lot of those other events are sort of winding down. To your point, it's maybe sort of charitable on his side that he's, maybe going to merge with some of those down the line. But I think that he's filling in a gap that is opening with all these other events kind of winding down into 1 or 2 events as opposed to the 5 that they used to have. He's filling the gap. And I think if he's successful, which I think ultimately he will be, then yeah, maybe it becomes sort of the world championship of snowboarding. It takes over Olympic qualifying. It could very well be the most credible thing. And I think having the focus of making sure that the best athletes are there, the number ones are there competing against each other, is not only going to set them up for that conversation to be very easy, but it's also going to help build the next generation of number ones.
So interesting. Rob Deerdeck, Paul Rabel, Shaun White, all cut from the same cloth. Star athletes with big platforms using that to elevate their entire sport and their entire community. It's very cool. Something I aspire to do in trail running, something that Rebecca Rush, Tim Tollefson are doing in their own ways, and things that we've talked about here on the podcast as well. Should we talk about white space at all? I think that's pretty obvious. It's just another one of the examples of audience-led products, audience-led brands. Shaun White doesn't necessarily need somebody to make him some cool outerwear. He can make it himself, leverage his own audience, capture that value, build a cool enterprise with his name on it that builds his legacy further. Anything else you want to say about white space or Shaun White?
Actually, I'd rather just mention the natural selection tour. I think that's one of the big ones that we kind of skipped over. So Travis Rice, who's also a huge name in snowboarding, put together this series many years ago. And the natural selection tour is kind of a backcountry snowboarding event, a competition with the best backcountry snowboarders. For a long time, X Games had half pipe and slope style, but backcountry was always sort of just like a video part that you'd have to disappear into the mountains for a couple months at a time. And then you'd come back with a bunch of clips and then you'd put it together in whatever film was coming out in that next cycle. And with the natural selection tour, Travis found a way to make backcountry snowboarding accessible to a wider audience and put the athletes on this bigger level in a major way. And they did a lot of really innovative stuff. For example, they have live drones chasing the snowboarders down the mountain. I mean, they did so many incredible things with this event, and it's only continued to grow. And again, you can look at this and be like, this is sort of like street league snowboarding in the way that they brought the best athletes together. They have a new contest format. They've raised the profiles of so many top athletes beyond snowboarding into the mainstream, this is another incredible offering from one of the best athletes in the sport who's really, again, transcended and done it over and over and over again. If you look at the films Travis has put out, those have reached way beyond the snowboarding audience.
Yeah, that's it.
And I
That's
think,
all. Absolute
yeah,
sensation.
the art of flight, yeah, fourth phase. I mean, this guy has done so many incredible things, and you just have to love it when you see all these athletes who are putting their time and attention back into not only being part of the sport but growing it and continuing to find new ways to make it a growing sport and to get more people into the outdoors and doing their thing and making it financially viable. None of these events could exist if they continue to lose money year after year after year, and that's a great sign that you can actually pull this off. And to have it done once already in snowboarding, in skateboarding, in all these sports so far, and continue to grow is a pretty healthy sign.
Awesome. Travis Rice, Shaun White, Rob Deerdeck, Paul Rabel, a lot of things to be inspired about. We were talking about how Michael Jordan just started a NASCAR team. Obviously, there's a lot of great examples of athletes transcending their sports. And again, that's sort of the theme of today's show. Just touching briefly on another analog here in track and field, not an outdoor sport, but worth mentioning because this is very interesting and big news. Basically, Michael Johnson, America's most famous track and field athlete, who back in the late 90s and early 2000s, we'll all remember, was shattering world records in his beautiful gold Nike track spikes, has launched what is going to be called Grand Slam Track. Again, another good brand, Lutzi. And effectively, I think he's now trying to compete with things like the Diamond League and take a sport like track and field, which has a core and very enthusiastic following, but has had a hard time breaking into the mainstream and giving a new competition format that will give this sport an opportunity to reach deeper into the mainstream and have a broader cultural and commercial impact. I'm just going to read a couple of things here, ask you to comment on it briefly, and then we can move on. What it says is four-time Olympic gold medalist Michael Johnson has announced his new premier global track league called Grand Slam Track and will host 4 meets or slams in 2025 with $12.6 million in prize money available. The winner of each respective slam group will take home $100,000 in prize money. So kind of ironic or serendipitous that these two pieces of news are landing in the same week. Shaun White starting the Snow League and Michael Johnson starting Grand Slam Track. Your comments, Aaron?
A lot of people putting down snowboards to start running.
Yeah, more prize money at least.
No, it's incredible, right? What he's going to do there and bringing a new format. And again, it's coming from an athlete who knows what they want to see in competition. This is where the value actually is, getting an athlete to say, this is how I think this is the best way to show this sport and how to incentivize athletes to be a part of these events. There are a lot of event concepts out there that actually aren't that great. For example, there's one that keeps popping up in snowboarding and skiing where they try to play poker and then based on their hand, they got to go up and do a trick or something contrived like that. And it drives me insane, but a lot of the athletes do it because there's just prize money on the line, and there's not a lot of prize money out there. So I guess I'll do this ridiculous, whatever. And it's refreshing to see things like the Snow League and this Grand Slam series happening where that the way that the event was made is from an athlete. And they said, this is the way that this sport needs to be shown. And I want it to be this way. And I'm taking athlete input to make sure that this is credible first. And then we can take it to the general population. And none of these events, I think, work unless they're credible to the athletes themselves and they have the buy-in from the athletes directly.
Yeah, good point. And I just
What?
want to credit, that was Sidious Mag that I just read that from off of their Instagram account. Sidious, sort of the leading media platform in track and field, who's done a really great job to sort of bring modern coverage to, again, this sort of niche but enthusiastic community. You were going to say something?
It's incredible. $12 million for a
I
prize
know.
purse. Like,
Again, like, how do you make
that's a
that
lot.
commercially viable? Obviously, they have a lot of investment behind them also, but that significantly outstrips anything that's been made available to track and field athletes ever. There's a lot of agents out there who are rubbing their hands together, seeing dollar signs, and what it does is get all the athletes excited to participate. And they understand that the athletes are the ones who bring the audience now, right? Athletes have never had more leverage than right now in the history of sports broadly, but especially in niche sports and niche communities. And recognizing that the athletes really are the audience, they are the influencers, they are the people that sort of create commercial opportunities for brands and move product, they got to be bought in. The best way to get them bought in is to make the athletes feel like, hey, I might be able to get paid here by participating in Grand Slam track. So many interesting things happening right now. Grand Slam track is going on in triathlon. There's both Super League and T100 who are sort of trying to take on Ironman, Shaun White, Street League, the PLL, and now like all the NIL deals and college football is really turning into a professional sport. Like, I don't know. It feels like every institution, going back to what we talked about last week, there's sort of the incumbents versus the challengers right now, not only with
Mhm.
brands, but also with events. It's a massive trend, I think, in human society.
One thing that we haven't really talked about is the athlete experience, and it's great that these events are popping up. It's great that these opportunities are being created, but the stakes for athletes are getting higher and higher. I was speaking to somebody who's racing the T100, and they were saying that every single race is like world championships because it's the best athletes being assembled and pushing each other to the absolute limit, whereas that only used to happen once a year, and you could kind of have A and B races. Now every race is an A race, which is really taxing on an athlete. So it's not all great news up and to the right all the way across for everybody. I
Yeah.
think how this plays out for the athletes, the financial incentives are really high and the rewards are high, but also the toll that it's going to take on them both mentally and physically can't be overlooked.
Yeah. Also, UTMB just announced a new increase in prize money compensation for the professional athletes starting this year at UTMB Mont Blanc, something we could cover in a future episode if we feel it's relevant. But what a fun conversation on the event side. Continuing with this theme of athletes who transcend their sports, before we wind down with BPC, there was an awesome article that was written in The Athletic about Nyjah Huston, the only skateboarder who I really know anything about, and therefore a great example of somebody who has transcended their sport. I am not endemic to the skate community, although I have a lot of appreciation for the culture. I've done some, like reading on the history of the sport and know a bit about its evolution over time. But Nyjah is the example of, hey, Dylan Bowman, he doesn't know much about skating, but he knows a lot about Nyjah. And this article helped me to learn a little bit more. It's basically about him in preparation for going to the Paris Olympics after having a disappointment in Tokyo. He went in as the heavy favorite to win the gold medal in Tokyo, fell short of that, and it feels like it taught him something. It helped him mature as an athlete, and it feels like he's hungry going in to Paris. So, with that as the preamble, again, we'll link to this full article in the show notes. But Aaron, I'd love to get your 2 cents on Nyjah Huston and the broader meta conversation of a grassroots sport going mainstream, going to the Olympics.
When skateboarding was announced for the Olympics, it was actually a huge, I'm looking for the right word on this one. It was a, a big conversation. There were a lot of
Controversial,
people,
very
yeah,
controversial.
a lot of skaters didn't want anything to do with the Olympics because that's not what skateboarding was. And skateboarding is a lifestyle, and skateboarding is not the Olympics. It's not fancy. It's not gold medals. That's not why people do it. And you saw a lot of people who were becoming athletes who were preparing with the Olympics in mind. And it really became a controversy, I guess is the best way to talk about how it was. And there were people who were on on either side of it, of like, I'm just going to lean into this because I think this is going to make skateboarding even bigger, and it's going to open up more doors for me as an athlete or for our sport in general. This is going to put us on a different level. Now we've got the final check mark from society that skateboarding is actually a sport. And then you had people that wanted nothing to do with it, and they were kind of clowning people that were excited about it. So I think it's difficult for any skater who's in that event to kind of ride that line of like, hey, I'm super credible, but I'm also not going to skip this opportunity to play on the biggest field. That said, there are other sports where winning a gold medal in the Olympics isn't really the biggest thing in the sport. Maybe basketball, golf. There's plenty of Olympic sports where it's a nice to have, but it's not the end all be all. And reading through this article made me think a lot about how, at Red Bull, we used to place a lot of articles leading into the Olympics to try to highlight our athletes and try to get their names out there. There's only so much you can do in the Olympic blackout window, and you're always looking for an angle to tell that story. Reading through that article, I really wonder. I know that the Olympics is like a big moment for everybody that's a part of it. And it sounds like Nyjah was under a lot of pressure. And that pressure was probably a lot more than just the competitive pressure. The pressure was, how am I going to show up in front of the rest of skateboarding here? And that was probably more pressure on him than the actual competition itself.
Yeah.
Is this the most important thing in his career for Paris? I don't necessarily think so, but it's a great angle on the
It's
story.
the one thing
Uh,
he hasn't done.
yeah, yeah, he's done pretty much everything else, and he's got everything already in his corner. So this would be the one final piece to have, and it would be great for him to have. But I don't think that if he doesn't make the podium at Paris, I don't necessarily know if that's like
Oh yeah.
that big of a deal.
Yeah, well, I mean, it may be
Yeah,
personally devastating for him, but his fans will certainly not lose any admiration. That's interesting what you said about placing articles, because that was sort of in the back of my head as I read this. Obviously, it's great content. It's interesting for a person like me, but you did sort of get the feeling, they name check Monster in the article. They name check Nike, I believe, two of Nyjah's biggest partners. And obviously, those brands are looking at ways to activate those partnerships, including with The Athletic, which is a very mainstream news publication now owned by the New York Times. Do you think one of those brands had a hand in placing this article?
absolutely. 100% that came from a brand. And that's the thing. For those who don't know, there's something called the Olympic blackout window. And there's a rule where if you are, it's gotten a little bit relaxed over the last couple Olympics, but for a while there, you couldn't even have them on your website. You could not draw an association to an athlete competing in the Olympics through your brand whatsoever. In the last couple Olympics, they've done a thing where you kind of register your sponsors with the Olympics, and the IOC makes it okay that, okay, yeah, you can have them on their website, but you can't say the word Olympics in
We
your
should say,
marketing.
we should make it obvious that that is because they don't want there to be conflicting sponsor relationships with the IOC's own partners. So this has been something
Correct.
that's been hyper inflammatory in the ranks of professional athletes. They hate it. They're like, hey,
Yeah.
why should I even compete at the Olympics? Which is part of the reason why I feel like the Olympics is kind of dying, sort of because athletes are getting less passionate about it. At least that's my interpretation, because they make their money from their brand partners. They're not making, the IOC, I don't think, is cutting massive checks even to gold medalists. And so the fact that brands can't activate the partnerships with their athletes, when athletes are the ones who are bringing all the value to the Olympics, and therefore the athletes know their brand partners are not getting any value from their competition, it creates a misalignment of incentives that I don't think is sustainable.
Absolutely not. And it's my favorite stories are actually the different manufacturers or brands who have tried to kind of sneak around IOC rules. For example, there's a story of, Nike has always been one of the main partners, and Adidas one year, they have the three stripes, and obviously that's a brand mark, so you couldn't have that. So they tried to do like some interesting stitching that looked like three stripes from far away, but it wasn't. And they're like, oh, it's not three stripes. Look, there's a little break in the line, whatever. There was actually a discussion at one point. I don't know how serious this was, but if you're a manufacturer of a product, you can have your logo in, a certain size or whatever on the gear. But if you're a sponsor, you can't. So I remember there was like a discussion that happened at one point where Red Bull's like, what if we just bought a helmet company and we did a small run of Red Bull helmets, then we could have the logo in. Even at that, like when we would make helmets for the athletes that were Red Bull athletes in the Olympics, it would be the sports blue. So there is at least some hint of it. But yeah, there are so many rules when it comes to the Olympics. And all of it is sort of prohibitive for the athletes themselves who rely on that sponsorship revenue. You're right that I don't necessarily think they get much from the Olympics. Usually the country pays them something per medal, but ultimately the people that are really helping these athletes get to where they are those partners. And it's kind of a bummer that they can't really get any real value back from having their athlete on the Olympic stage in this blackout window. But surely if you get a gold medal, the blackout period ends, then you can just go to town, making sure that everybody knows that association, that connection. And it certainly helps that athlete's platform and their brand,
Hmm.
and will pay off down the line. But in the moment, it's sort of a bummer that you can't do anything.
I had a guy named Greg Valet on my other podcast recently when we were talking about what he thinks is the inevitability that trail running will be included in the Summer Olympics. He is sort of the founder and steward of the Golden Trail World Series, which is sort of the premier short distance trail running event circuit. He has been a pioneer both in the event space, the brand space, and the media space over many years. So it's really interesting to talk to him about the potential of trail running being in the Olympics. And I think we would also experience a similar controversial inflection point moment with the trail community where there would be a debate as to whether that was a positive thing for the sport over the short and long term. We could do a deeper athlete spotlight on Nyjah. There's just one thing that I wanted to mention. People can go find really interesting things to read about him, this article included, but there's some great sort of hero's journey qualities to his story. One of the reasons why me and a lot of people are sort of attracted to his story. It reminds me a lot about Andre Agassi's book, which I just read, as our listeners will know I've talked about a million times. Nyjah, it seems like, had a really complicated relationship with his dad growing up as Andre did. The common thread there being that without their dads, they wouldn't be the athletes that they are. So a lot of interesting things in Nyjah's story. He's sort of made bad decisions, bounced back. He's been a dominant force in the sport and taken it to new heights. And another great example of an athlete who has transcended their sport and taken it to a new level. Closing comments before we get to BPC, Lutzi?
I just want to rewind for a second where you said trail running might be in the Olympics, and it just made me think the only thing that won't be controversial is who they choose to be the announcer.
Come on, let's
NBC
go.
Olympics, Debo, it's happening, man.
Let's see.
It's
Let
happening.
me get through this next week first. If I say something inflammatory by accident and get canceled, it's over for me anyway. So I think. What? So after Paris, what is 2028?
LA.
LA. I think that would be probably too early. They've probably already decided all the sports that are going to be involved in the LA
They
Olympics.
they could do it. Yeah, I think you're right. They could do it as I forget what it's called. It's like a preview sport. Like breakdancing was one of those where it was sort of like a preview where they kind of tested it. They have like a
How much
test
did
event
Red
where
Bull have to do with making breakdancing an Olympic sport? Like, to me, that's one of those things where I just scratch my head. Not to put any shade on breakdancing. Awesome, cool community, awesome, life pursuit. I'm sure great exercise for a lot of people. I don't know. To me, it doesn't feel like an Olympic sport.
yeah, and I'm sure that they had a very, very similar discussion as did the skateboarders of like, this is culture, not sport. But at the same time, I've got to imagine the IOC is looking for ways to continue being relevant and to continue to grow in new directions and reach new people and
Younger
make things interesting.
audiences.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of fun as an exercise to go back at previous Olympic sports that used to be in that are no longer, or even existing ones that are still like, wait, that's a sport.
Yeah.
I think actually when you look at the wide range of things that are or have been considered Olympic sports, breakdancing's not that weird, and actually trail running makes a ton of sense. It should absolutely be there. I feel like that's an easy decision.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Well, let's revisit the Olympic conversation in a future episode. That was really fun. I don't think we really planned to talk about it much, but ended up being sort of a theme. But awesome episode as usual, Lutzi. Let's close things down with BPC. You get us started.
Okay, America's Got Talent featured my good friend Andre Burton. He is a legendary bike trials rider. So trials is like the sport that I love and that I do, and it's very, very obscure. We ride bikes that actually are so small that they don't have seats because it's so low to the ground, basically. And you're mostly on your back wheel hopping around from spot to spot. To get on America's Got Talent and do what Andre did was just incredible. To have Heidi Klum posting on her Instagram video of a bike trials rider just blew my mind. And the best part about it was that actually, instead of just like come out on the stage, do your thing, that's it, his segment actually began outside the studio on top of Simon Cowell's trailer. He jumped off of it. He had a little back and forth with Simon beforehand, and then he jumped and rode kind of the back lot of America's Got Talent, and then he came in on the top of the set and then rode down the stairs through the audience, did this amazing show on stage, absolutely crushed it. It was an incredible segment. It wasn't just your standard come out on stage and do your thing. And that for me kind of blew my mind. And I was so pumped that Andre got a chance to shine like that. But what's really interesting to me is that Andre is not from America. So I always kind of thought that America's Got Talent was kind of like a talent show for Americans. Andre was actually on the UK's Got Talent 6 months ago or something like that and absolutely crushed it there too. And I now have so many more questions about how these shows are put together. But again, they're not necessarily going for the most credible, like, oh, yeah, these are all Americans. They're trying to put on a good show that everybody's going to enjoy. So I'm going to let that one slide. My good friend Andre is from the UK, and that's fine. And I'm glad that he made it to the States. I would love it if he came here more. And he did an incredible job putting my favorite sport in front of literally millions and millions and millions of people. And that's great for everyone.
What a perfect BPC and another example of an athlete transcending their sport with a mainstream audience. Shout out, Andre. Okay, mine. I have referenced Invest Like the Best a couple of times here on the podcast. I've used it as a BPC in the past. This is the second time that I'm going to be using it. An episode that went up a couple of days ago on Tuesday is fantastic. Lutzi, it gave me a couple of takeaways that I think are relevant to the Second Nature audience. This episode was with a guy named Pat Grady, who's a longtime partner at Sequoia Capital, the iconic venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. The title of the podcast is Relentless Application of Force, which conjures a feeling that I'm familiar with and that I try to embody, again, going against the all good things are worth doing slow or whatever we started the podcast with. My instinct is to always press, to always be on the gas, and to always have a relentless application of force, acknowledging that there are trade-offs there and that it does come at a cost. There's two major takeaways that I want to introduce to our audience here, and feel free to respond if it feels relevant to you, Lutzi. One of the things is knowing what you're optimizing for. And I think for me as a small business owner, I'm always so down in the weeds of and the details of just checking the boxes every day that I lose sight of really what is it that we're optimizing for. And you come to learn when you own your own business that everything is a trade-off, even when you have big wins and things that are positive, you are sacrificing something in service of that. And so knowing what you're optimizing for and being okay with it is really important in just an exercise of being honest with ourselves. And so it made me think, like, what are we optimizing for? And the things I could come up with are community impact, right? Like moving trail running forward, doing what we can to shine a light on this amazing sport and this amazing community. But also, let's be honest, One of the things I'm optimizing for is building long-term enterprise value, creating a life-changing outcome or lifestyle for myself, my family, and the people who work with us. But there's trade-offs, right? When those are your things that you're optimizing for, when it is the long-term enterprise value, I mean, we've talked about it here on the podcast, and the reality is that I didn't pay myself for 3 years. I still make, this is the least I've ever been paid in my professional career. I'm a 38-year-old dad, but I'm optimizing for long-term enterprise value. So I think just a fun personal exercise that we can all do. What are you optimizing for? Think about it. My second takeaway here, Aaron, is he closes the podcast with a beautiful sort of just description of the importance of being given a chance in your career and giving other people a chance. And I wanted to bring this up because you, Aaron Lutzy, are an example of giving me a chance. There's been some great examples in my career, none more so than you in my athletic career. And so I want to thank you publicly for giving me a chance. And I think you've done that for a lot of people. And it's something that I think we can all do better, and something that I want to do with Free Trail as we do grow is give other people a chance and give them an opportunity to be successful. Know what you're optimizing for, give people a chance. Closing comments from you, Aaron. I like to get sentimental.
I'm here for it. I think the idea of giving other people a chance, my mindset the entire time I was managing people, whether it was full-time employees or athletes, was that their success was my success. And that's what really drove me to bring as much as I could to the table for all the people around me. To give people chances is to give them opportunities for everyone to be successful. And so for you to be successful, then I'm successful in so many ways. And the more opportunities I can bring to you, the more opportunities you have to be successful. And we all rise with that, which is, I think, super important. And I hope that a lot of people are doing exactly that.
Hell
What
yeah.
are you optimizing for? Man, there's so many different ways to talk about this too. And in my own life, both my wife and I are really kind of optimizing quality of life right now. And I told her this year is going to be like the NBA rebuilding year, where we're going to take an L for a season, but it's going to be worth it. We're going to get the championship.
Yeah.
And I think we're both pretty committed to really optimizing our quality of life. There's this really interesting tidbit that Derek Sivers, he's a author, he started some businesses and stuff. He talks about the donkey problem. And there's this donkey that's tied to a stick, and 6 feet away, there's a bucket of water, and 6 feet in the opposite direction, there's food. And the donkey can't decide which one to go after first and ends up dying in the middle. And I think about this donkey problem a lot when I'm trying to optimize what should I actually be doing, because I could be doing this thing over here, or I could be doing that thing over there. But if I'm not prioritizing action, if I'm not optimizing for what's actually going to work, then I'm just going to die in the middle. And so I'm just trying not to be a dead donkey, I guess.
Okay, well, an exercise to leave our audience with. Think about what you're optimizing for in your life and your career. And if, I don't know, for some people, I think it's probably not obvious. And I think it's a good way to just check in and course correct if necessary. Bringing things to a close here. Remember, go follow Second Nature on LinkedIn. Come on, we're going huge on the world's biggest professional networking platform. You got to follow us on Instagram too, at secondnature.media. Sign up for the newsletter. For Aaron Lutzy, I'm Debo. Lutzy, drive safe, have fun with Tegan, and I look forward to catching up soon.
Yeah, man. Good luck in Tahoe.